Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, it's a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Ariana Grande called Thank You Next. So, as some of you probably know, I'm currently working on an extended video essay surrounding the separation of art and the artist in music, and how, especially in the modern social media tabloid landscape, it's a theory that's increasingly unfeasible. Now, of course, my larger point will be that it was never all that feasible to begin with, but you gotta wait until I release that project, and I'd like to say a month or so before I explain a little more further. Just priming the pump, something for y'all to think about. But really, if you're looking for a project that might as well prove my point by example in block capitals across every fiber of its being, it was the rush creation and release of the album Thank You Next by Ariana Grande. And yes, before even getting into this album directly, I'm calling it a rush job. Not only was Sweetener released midway through last year, singles, they were still in charting circulation. And this is not a case like Taylor Swift's Reputation, where the album was tanking upon arrival, at least according to expectations. The singles, they had staying power, they had top 10 presence, and the reviews of Sweetener are solid. But like with Reputation, it was hard to avoid the feeling that Thank You Next is being presented as a slice of spin control in the tumult of Ariana Grande's public life. Both the collapse of her engagement to Pete Davidson, which, in going back to Sweetener, and especially the song she titled after him, it was so easy to predict. Hell, I did predict it. But also the tragic passing of Mac Miller, where in both cases Ariana Grande faced a sort of toxic social media backlash that would be hell for anyone. But avoiding that conversation, as I said last year when the song Thank You Next was first released, Ariana Grande had a few advantages over Taylor Swift in that she didn't have the insane weight of cultural expectations placed upon her, and that allowed the song and the response to be so breezy and magnanimous, a moment of well-timed spin control that seemed to work in her favor for once. But that is what it was, especially with the inclusion of names which gave the song that additional emotional impact and intensity. I mean, you pull back from that, you separate the art from the artist as it is, and the entire song feels kind of flighty and disposable, an underweight fusion of pop, R&B, and trap that for an outside observer would make no sense to send them to the top of the Hot 100 for weeks now, only made to feel so much more because Republic is throwing more money at it than they probably should to make it stick. And if Imagine increased some of those suspicions, Seven Rings confirmed it, along with a cheap, controversy-laden rollout that for an artist and her team so measured and big budget over the past couple of albums, it felt alarmingly slapdash. Coupled with such a quick turnaround time for this album, she's bragged that this album was written in a week and recorded in not much longer, that was actively cannibalizing singles from the previous project, singles like Breathin' that were probably better. Yeah, I'll freely admit I was worried that this would be a rush job and not nearly reflect the potential shown on Sweetener for the sort of experimentation and emotional maturity that gave that project so much promise, at least for me. So was I wrong? Alright, so let me step back and give you all a view into my process. I had first heard this album on Thursday, had about a half dozen listens by Friday, and I figured I had enough material for this full review. But I was also aware that said material was a little bit cooler on this project than anything else Ariana Grande has released before, so I decided, take a step back, reconsider this, give the album the weekend to sit with me properly. And yet, coming back to it now, another half dozen or more listens later, honestly, while I understand her approach a little better, and her desire to make something more breezy and tossed off to better fit the streaming era, it makes sense. It can't help but feel like a regression to me. Even if you didn't like the experimentation and the production on Sweetener, there was a level of refinement into that album that Thank You Next doesn't even attempt. A strange lowering of the stakes that in the right moment could feel bigger because Ariana Grande has reached that level of fame, but then places it in the context of her larger discography, where this will inevitably fall short. And I'm gonna say it right now, it's probably her weakest project to date, and it does raise a lot of concerns with me going forward. And what's all the more frustrating is that when it comes to sheer vocal ability, Ariana Grande has only sounded better with every single album she's put out, nearly entirely shunning the oversold pop belting of early albums in favor of increasingly delicate cooing but with sharper diction, spoken delivery that shows off a lot of subtlety, and trap flows that she can handle at least somewhat convincingly. And while I'd argue it feels a little more performative than it probably should, more on this in a bit, it certainly does a good enough job of convincing an audience that this should be an authentic picture of this increasingly brief snapshot of her life right now. And hell, I'd argue the lyrics kind of get close to that too, and that she seems to be taking the similar tactic as other pop acts, making the heel turn and trying to expose some of her vulnerabilities and human frailties, from the desperate angst of Imagine to the clinginess of Needy, from the numbing hookup on a song like Bad Idea that lives up to the title, to the inability to accept the reality of her partner's life and choices outside of what she wants on In My Head. It actually is strikingly reminiscent of a similar numbing approach to pain and media overexposure that Taylor Swift took on Reputation. But minus the enormous societal weight that suffocated Taylor, Ariana Grande can't afford to be a little flighty and coy, which for her is absolutely a better look, but on some level it's also less compelling, and that's where we really have to dig into the arc and structure of this album. I mean, for one, in fitting with the tossed together feel of the project, any attempt at a narrative or theme or arc feels slipshod. Insecurities in a relationship are followed by moments where she has to push people away, and while Nassau is solid enough, Bloodline's got the really sort of clumsy language choices that could definitely be framed a little bit better. Hell, dig a bit deeper and you got songs like Makeup, which, alright, fine. Ariana Grande has a habit of going back a couple albums now where she will overextend the metaphor, but what I found more frustrating was Ghostin', which feels like her attempt to rewrite Rihanna's Unfaithful, made all the more jarring by how it's so very obviously referencing Pete Davidson and the late Mac Miller. And this is where the larger conversation surrounding how much we can really differentiate this project from the artist, that's where it comes in. Because on the one hand, the song is really only salvaged from being a retread of a really bad song conceit, because we know the context of her struggles to get over Mac Miller's passing, and that's a very valid struggle to put in her art in this way. It's a well-structured metaphor. But if we're going to accept that in kind, we also need to accept the vapidity of Seven Rings, or how despite the very real turmoil she's experiencing, just how coy any real confrontation with her vulnerabilities and flaws can feel. And the biggest example of that comes on Fake Smile, a song where Ariana Grande has seen all the bullshit thrown at her on social media and by the tabloids over the past year. She's done playing nice, and yet there's something very performative and very theatrical about that admission. Not only because there's no hint of rawness or real edge or anger to this album or her delivery, but also because there's no follow-through, and instead it feels more like a deflective play rather than something a little more real. A shame, because otherwise I like the song, I just wish I could believe it. Then we got the newest single, and arguably her worst to date, Break Up With Your Girlfriend, I'm Bored. And look, I get now being single and wanting a fresh hookup, but the bored, capricious air of the song, cribbing notes from Avril Lavigne circa 2007 of all people, is not just the worst possible way to end your album, but also raises questions about manipulation and immaturity, compromising any sympathy she built for herself across this album because of everything she's gone through, because regardless of what she does now, good or ill, she's gonna get away with it, with no consequences. And this is where we're gonna have to talk about my largest issue with this album, the production. And I already know the excuses that will be made for this. She's clearly taking influence from streaming accessible hip-hop and trap. She's sliding into mainstream trends and proving that she could do them better. And besides, it was all designed to capture a very specific moment and sound, not really create something timeless or resonant. And am I the only one who thinks that's a lot of weak excuses for phoning in any sort of refinement to ride a cheap wave of hype because, again, she's big enough that she knows she'll get away with it because her fans will buy it? And let's not avoid how Ariana Grande has always struggled to find production that adequately complements her breathy tone and pop R&B cadence, because apparently taking lessons from what Mariah Carey did just a few months ago with her album would be too hard or something. And I get that while I like Pharrell's contributions on Sweetener, I was in the minority. But you know what? That shouldn't have been an excuse for them to stop trying with the experimentation. The one kind of inspired choice comes in the attempts to fuse in more orchestral elements or vintage elements opposite the trap production on songs like Imagine, or the elegance behind the hook of Fake Smile, or the opulent swell of the strings on the outro of Bad Idea, or the accents on Ghostin'. It mirrors the fusion of ideas and contradictory genres she's working with on the album, and hell, I was even somewhat on board with the horns on Bloodline, even if the production does feel incredibly flimsy. But that's a consistent issue with this album as a whole, and that the quality of the pickups and choices of tones just feels really undercooked, especially in the sharper backing vocals vocals are the places where Ariana's voice is gonna peak in the mix, which is exactly what you would expect for a project recorded in a rush where they didn't want to go back for more takes to get the mic positioning right. But for somebody like Ariana Grande, who's got such great natural delivery, it is such a misstep. And then you get similar issues with the percussion and the beats. I get keeping things more in-house if you're rushing, but so much of the trap skitters, the hi-hats, and the bass, they lack cleaner fidelity and punch to match with her vocals. And if we're being blunt, they sound really goddamn cheap. And this isn't being lo-fi for texture. This sounds like creating stock loops instead of hiring the bigger name producers who could give you something a little bit more interesting and textured to work with that could complement your voice, and instead this is just clashing jarringly with the classical elements. And that's before you get the melodic tones that sound barely on key, like the limp chords behind Needy, or the faux Beyonce clunker of Makeup, or the pitched down bassy mumble behind In My Head, or the ugly horn fidelity on Bloodline, or even despite a decent bass groove and something of a decent melodic progression there that I actually kind of appreciated. Thanks Max Martin, who also gives some of the credit for the sharper guitar lick behind Bad Idea, and even some people drawing comparisons to Goche, somebody that I used to know. And that's what's exasperating for me. So much of these songs are so heavily reliant upon Ariana Grande's vocal line for any sort of core that makes the influx of reverb just makes them songs feel skeletal and undercooked, implying something stripped back and intimate with one breath, but also trying to carry so much more weight and importance and contemporary culture with the other, which might as well have been the damn point of all of it. I don't know. And you know what? For at least recognizing that vision, I can give Ariana Grande credit for something of a cohesive sound and structure. For as tossed off and thematically frustrating as this can be, sonically, I can see for a specific moment of time within Ariana Grande's career where this works in microcosm. And you know what? If the general public was treating this like a side project or a career footnote, like how Kendrick Lamar treated Untitled Unmastered, that'd be one thing. But instead, Ariana Grande is getting #1 hits off this thing, and I worry that the response will convince her and her handlers that a quicker slapdash approach, rife with personal drama, should be her path going forward, because it appears to be working, which I could argue could really shorten her career lifespan and longevity, and short-circuit real artistic development and potential going forward, and she's a good enough artist to deserve better. But again, I'm trying to judge this based upon what I got, not what I wanted, so I'm still kind of lukewarm on it. I'm giving it about a 6 out of 10, but given how ubiquitous this will be for so many people, is there even really a point of me recommending it when you're all going to hear it anyway? Whatever. Ariana Grande is still an exceptional talent, she's a great singer, and as much as she wants to move forward, coming off this album, I'm right there with her. If your turnaround time is going to actually lead to better quality on the road, well, we'll see what happens. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, this review went long, and look folks, I really wanted to love this. I don't. It's okay. I don't think it's great by any stretch of the mind. But hey, if you want to buy or stream it, links down there below. And I got the poll up there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. Although I put money on songs coming off this project just not sticking around nearly as much as stuff that she had off of Sweetener, or Dangerous Woman, or My Everything, or even some from yours truly. I just think those albums had more refinement and more longevity long term. That's at least what I'm saying. I could be proven wrong, but I don't think I will be. Beyond that though, hey, if there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in supporting the channel, link to my Patreon right over there. Still reconfiguring things, but we'll see what happens. Video essay might come out there first, you never know. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.